Welcome to another episode of the Brewing Fiction Podcast. Today I welcome Dr. Bruce Farmer. He's the author of the award-winning fiction thriller entitled Blood, Sapphire's Revenge. Welcome to the show, Bruce.
Thank you, Keith.
You're very welcome. It's an honor to have you on the show. You and I have connected a number of months ago, and you're a busy guy. You've got lots going on. We've talked a little bit offline, and your story, not just Blood, Sapphire, but your life story is definitely interesting. I hope that you're willing to share some of that with us today.
Of course.
All right. Well, how about we step into Author's Corner and you tell us anything and everything you'd like to tell us about yourself, and then that'll lead us into the podcast. So, Bruce, take it away.
Well, I'm 72 years old. I was an Army brat. My dad was a nuclear physicist veterinarian who worked in Area 51 and went above ground testing on the atomic bomb. And my mother was Chicago Art Institute art major. And I was the only child. So we traveled the world, and it was a wackadoo kind of upbringing, but exciting. And from there, we finally settled in Beaverton, Oregon. And then I got into medical school and graduated the Oregon Health Sciences University in 1983. And from there, I had a wonderful run of emergency. I was a trauma doc, ER medicine doc.
Yeah.
And then around 2000, I felt this call, not to the ministry, but to attend seminary to pursue a philosophical, theological question having to do with determinism and free will, or sovereignty and free will. How do you explain both, which we all agree we have? Everyone will say, yes, I have free will.
Yeah.
And everyone will say, well, yes, we understand determinism, or things happen like a clock in nature. But how do you reconcile the two? So I left medicine to pursue this. And it was in the year 2000 when I had this kind of solution to this philosophical problem. But at the same time, in this kind of moment, I saw this book, Blood, Sapphire's Revenge. And that was 2000. That was 24 years ago.
Oh, wow.
I was reading the book of Esther about this, orphan girl, Hadassah. Her uncle is Mordecai. And as she's very beautiful, very wise, very beautiful woman who becomes queen of Persia. Artaxerxes, he makes her queen. But he doesn't know that she's Jewish. Mordecai said, don't tell anyone that you're Jewish. And then an enemy arises who decides to destroy the Jews as a race. And Mordecai says to Esther, you better say something. You better do something. And she says, well, I haven't been summoned to the king in 30 days. If I just walk in without being invited, the Persian laws demand death unless he holds out the golden scepter. And Mordecai makes a statement that to me is, in a sense, the theme of Blood, Sapphire's Revenge, and a theme for what I believe is a theme for every man and woman who hears this statement, because it touches on destiny. Mordecai says to her, if you don't do something, Queen Esther, deliverance will come somewhere. But perhaps you were born for such a time as this. Maybe you are where you are because it has been arranged.
Okay.
And I felt the weight of that statement all my life. Maybe you were born for such a time as this. And when we're all faced with difficulties, we look at ourselves and say, why is this happening? And we can reflect. This is an ancient question. Well, maybe you were born for this moment. Maybe fate and destiny is calling you to a higher place. So, as it turns out, Esther saves her people. And, I had this thought in the year 2000. What would it look like if you took Queen Esther and transported her into our century and made her to be an elite spec ops sniper in the Israeli Defense Force,
Okay.
who comes to face a similar question. And in fact, in the plot, she takes out a really bad guy and in the process offends a man who is bent on destroying Jerusalem with nuclear tipped rockets. So he puts the hit out on Hattie, not knowing that he killed her father 27 years earlier on the day she was born. Hattie has been looking for the man who killed her father 27 years earlier. And there you have it.
There it is.
It will turn out to where, through thick and thin, she will be in tatters and in ruins, physically at her end, when the director of the Mossad will call her out of the blue and say, we're looking for this man named X, and he's going to destroy Jerusalem. And the fact is, we can't find him, but every time you turn around, we know he's after you. So you just stand back and we're going to
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah. Yeah. She's the
And
bait.
she says, so I'm the goat. He said, well, yeah,
Yeah.
there are worse things, but maybe you were born for this moment. Maybe this is where in Shakespeare's, you stepped on the stage. You're a player on the stage with the central role. So I had this vision, and I've carried this for 24 years. I've kind of started writing and then put it down, picked it up, put it down.
Yeah.
And at one point, I met with someone from the Hollywood industry, an insider, kind of a big name person, who listened to the plot and said, if you can finish this book and see it to its end, this will become a movie.
Wow.
And that was a long time ago. And I went, okay. Well, so in 2016, a business that I had, as an entrepreneur, I had created this business and we went bankrupt. And I was suddenly left with no sense of what I should do. Where do I pick up the pieces? And as it turned out, I went and sought advice from a senior analyst of Carl Jung, a Jungian psychotherapist. And I sat down and I briefly explained my dilemma. And I said, but I do have a dream. Well, when you tell a Jungian that you have a dream, I mean, this is their bread and butter.
Right.
Jung interpreted over 80,000 dreams. I mean, the guy is phenomenal. So she says, she picked up her yellow pad and her pencil. I remember she said, well, tell me your dream. I went, oh, okay. I said, well, I dreamt that I was laying on my back under this mountain stream, this clear, cold mountain stream. And it was running over me and it had iced over. And I looked like Robert Frost. And I was trying to get out. I was trying to breathe. And at the same time, the moon had come up and there was moonlight and the edges were starting to melt. She said, well, have you ever been a poet? And I went, well, in high school, I mean, that was 50 years ago. Yeah, I wrote some poetry. But then I got into medicine and I haven't left ever since. She said, well, in the Jungian universe, to live under the sun is to be in your productive years where you're earning money, raising a family, doing stuff. But when you live under the moon is art, painting, poetry, and it's of a wholly different reality. You've lived under the sun for a long time, but perhaps your subconscious is saying it's time for you to move under the moon. And she said, are you writing anything? Well, Keith, I'd been starting to poke away at Blood Sapphire's Revenge. And I
Right.
went, well, yeah. She said, well, maybe this is your new path. I'll let you make that decision, but perhaps your subconscious is saying, hey, it's time to
It's
move
time.
into a whole. So I started writing full time at that point. I put everything aside and we lived we were helping my parents. They were very old. We'd kind of made a commitment to take care of them until they died on their
Hmm.
property out in the forest.
Okay.
And so the only place I could find that was quiet was my dad's old workshop, which is just full of John Deere tractor parts, and it's just a mess, but it was quiet.
Yeah.
And I started writing. And sure enough, uh, 2 years ago, I finished the silly thing. And
Yeah.
I gave the manuscript to an editor who took 120,000 words down to 90,000 words,
Right.
which was brutal. I mean, she took out whole paragraphs,
Yeah.
whole chapters that I'd spent months and months and months on.
Right.
And I said,
Right.
Karen, are you sure we have to get rid of this entire chapter? She says, yeah, it doesn't have any bearing on the book. I went, oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
thanks. But anyway, so it got published. We've just, I've been totally shocked by its reception. I mean,
Yeah.
someone asked me to send it in for these awards and things, and I really did ask the question, are you sure that's a good use of my time? I mean, it's why do that? I said, well, just
Yeah.
send it in. And
Yeah.
then I got back these 5-star things, and I went, I don't, are they sure they, what?
Did they read my book?
So that's kind of how it went from what I call a visionary experience in the year 2000, which is a very fruitful time in my life, to a dream that changed the course of my life as well. And so now I write, and I'm living under the moon, which is a
Living under
very
the
different
moon.
experience
Wow.
for a person that practiced medicine.
I bet.
Yeah.
So you no longer practice medicine at all. You're
No,
100%
no,
right.
I'm
Wow.
I'm the classic curbside consult.
Yeah.
Everyone grabs you and says, "Hey, I've got this problem. I got this problem." I go, "Hey, I'm not licensed. I have no malpractice insurance, so
Yeah.
I can give you advice under the Good Samaritan law, which means you're in a bad way, and I'm giving you advice that's as a Good Samaritan." They go,
Gotcha.
"Oh, okay, okay, we get it. So here's the problem."
Yeah. You can't turn them away,
Yeah,
eh?
right.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing that. That's an interesting way to get into writing. We all have our stories, right?
Yes.
Mine is just I'm at a point in my life where my kids are grown. I have a lot of free time, driving my wife crazy. She says you need to find a hobby. So my hobby became writing and spending
Yeah,
some
yeah,
time in the basement.
yeah,
We all have our
yeah,
stories, right? Yours is
yes,
definitely a little more intriguing than mine, but thanks for
yeah,
sharing that, though, Bruce.
yeah, you
Appreciate it.
bet.
All right. Here's what I call Fast Five. This is just a little segment we do just to get to know you a little bit more. All
Sure.
right. So, first of all, do you like to drink coffee or tea?
I'm a coffee guy.
Coffee guy?
Yeah,
Okay. As am
coffee
I.
snob, actually.
Are you? Oh, you like all
Yeah.
the fancy coffee now?
Yeah, well, when we did this cruise on this ocean
Yeah.
liner, they
Yeah.
served their fancy coffee, and Ellen and I just couldn't stand it. So we got off, I think we got off in Singapore, and we ran to at that point, we ran to Starbucks. We found a
Starbucks.
Starbucks,
Okay.
and we ordered all the Italian roast and a little French press. And we came back on board and went, we've got it. Everyone said, yeah, you're just coffee snobs.
Yeah. All right. Coffee snob. Tick. All right. So you kind of talked a little bit about Blood Sapphire's Revenge. This question basically asks whether you're a plotter or a pantser.
I'm more of a pantser than a
Are you?
plotter. But when
Okay.
I started this work, it took shape pretty quickly until I knew I needed a female protagonist
Yeah.
and a really evil guy. And as I described the plot to Martha Blake, my psychotherapist,
Yeah.
really one of those wise women that you meet once or twice in your lifetime, she said, "Well, there are themes of a Grimm's fairy tale here." And these are archetypal themes that are running deep in your soul. And we all have them.
Yeah.
Whoever is listening, we all have archetypal things that are running through us that are deep. And in this case, I described this action about this female protagonist and this evil guy and da 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 da, and how her mother was involved. And Martha said, "Well, you're talking about Fitcher's bird." I said, "What?" She said, "Yeah, that's Fitcher's bird." She said, "There's a third. You got to have a third woman in this." I said, "How did you know that?" She says, "Because it's coming out of you onto the page." So you've got a situation where this protagonist has got to rescue her mother and her younger sister. I said, "Well, that's amazing." Said, "Yeah." So I had the basic ideas, but as I started
Right.
to write, I'd sit down, and from there, the moment I sat down, it's just like I I have all the works of Shakespeare on in my library. So I
Yeah.
would read Shakespeare a lot because I there's no one who can take in the space of a few pages take you from King Lear, who's visionary, to King Lear, who doesn't have eyes. He's sightless. I mean, he's sane and then he's crazy. He's Shakespeare can do things where you least suspect it in a short amount of time. And so I always pressed myself as I was writing was, am I need to mix this up. Where can I go and make this completely unpredictable?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then I would pursue that. I go, well, what happens if Hattie gets shot? What happens if this happens? What happens if she
Yeah.
gets
Yeah.
blown up? What happens? And I go, well, that would be wow. And then Atkins, the famous writer, I think Susan Atkins, said that whenever you have a protagonist, you put that protagonist through everything imaginable short of death. And when they're on the verge of death, hanging, just standing on a cliff, you push them over. You
Yeah.
never let up because the reader identifies with being pushed over the cliff. No one identifies with, yeah, I was on the cliff, but then someone rescued me. Yeah, forget that. That
Yeah.
isn't my life. I was pushed over. And then I also have a book that I was looking for the other day, but it's another book that challenged me about the levels of reality in each scene so that I can take Staff Sergeant Hattie Abrams, the protagonist, who's an elite spec ops sniper, a crack shot with any weapon, and Hattie can take a gun and point it at someone and shoot them. And we all go, yeah, so what? Well, I've just described the death of a human being. Yeah, so what? And the writer of this book said, so what?
Yeah.
You have to go to the second level, which is what would a close relative think of the act? What would her mother say if she saw her daughter, whom she loves, out in a battle zone shooting and killing people? What would her
Right.
mother say?
Right.
And you work that into the inner dialogue. I did this, but what would mom say? The third level is what would a hero say? In this book, Hattie's hero is Winston Churchill. You know, when 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 the going gets tough, the tough get going. You know, if it looks like
Yeah.
hell, go deeper. There's nothing. Churchill never had any out for pain. If you're in pain, yeah, move on. And so Hattie will ask the question, what would he say? Is this a moral right or a moral wrong? And so this writer just challenges you to think through the different levels of questions posed to this protagonist by people. What would the Quran say? What would the Bible say? What would Zoroaster? What would famous philosophers say about this act of shooting? Now, obviously, you can't write about all of these things, but you have an inner dialogue so that the reader is being pulled into the action beyond, yeah, really good shot.
Yeah. Yeah.
There,
Yeah.
the reader is going, wow, I've felt that before when I did this thing that I don't want to tell anyone about. I was so concerned what my parents were thinking. when really it
Yeah.
wasn't their business.
Yeah. 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 So
So
yeah, they infer it into their lives instead of
yes, so
had it. Yeah.
I guess I kind of had a plot, but I'm more of a pantser.
I think you've already answered this one in letting us get to know you. Would you prefer writing in a bustling cafe or a quiet library?
Oh, I like the quiet library. Yeah, I'm an
Yes,
introvert, so
for sure.
I I can interact with folks, but I like quiet.
Like a lot of us writers, we're
Yeah,
introverts, and
yeah.
yeah, our best work comes when it's peaceful. All right. Do you prefer a pen or a keyboard?
Keyboard
Keyboard.
from the get go. Yeah, yeah.
And your writing, would you prefer to do plot driven or character driven stories?
I have a basic plot, but when someone reads Blood Sapphire's Revenge, it's insanely character driven.
Character driven, for sure.
I mean, I am at core a Jungian in my thinking about how the psyche works, which is always you're always in depth analysis. You're always asking what drives this person to do this thing.
Yeah.
So all of my characters have an inner dialogue with who am I? Why am I doing this? I have to go here. I must, because if I didn't do it, I wouldn't be true to myself.
Right. So that's fast five. Now we'll slip right on into the interview here, and again, in getting to know you a little bit, you've answered my first question. What sparks your passion for writing, and when did you decide to become a writer? Did you do writing at all when you were practicing? Beside medical papers and the things that are required, did you do any of your writing?
No, I really didn't. I
Okay.
always, yeah. Moving into a life under the in moonlight was a huge transition. It was like it took me months and months and months to get away from the passive, how may I help you today? How can I help you?
Yeah.
To never advancing, if you think someone has a heart problem, let's investigate that. To the Hemingway, give me one good sentence.
In terms of balancing your time, now that you're retired from medicine, tell me a little bit about your writing process. Would you mind sharing how you spend your day or how you spend your writing time?
Well, the second book is Blood Sapphire's Fury. And it begins where Blood Sapphire's Revenge ends. So, and I do have an end in sight. So I have a beginning and an end.
Right.
And it deals with a very different existential threat to the world. It's not nuclear, it's a virus.
Okay.
A lethal COVID, that is like smallpox. And nowadays you can design viruses in scary, scary ways. You can put together, an Ebola virus plus a smallpox virus and a hantavirus and create something that is almost 80% lethal, and it transmits in 6 generations. It's gone from one to thousands and thousands of people. These things are now available. So the
Yeah.
second book really deals with that.
Okay.
So I sit down and knowing where I'm headed, I've got Hattie and her love interest are going after the bad guy. I'm involving world stage players who are also want this virus. So it's going to the highest bidder.
Wow.
And I have to have a reason to write. Once I have a reason to write, I find myself making the time, whether I get
Okay.
up at 5:30 in the morning or 9:30 or whenever, but I find myself at a desk with my little word processor
Yeah.
typing
Okay.
and just letting this run out, letting things develop.
Okay.
Now, at the same time, we have found a screenwriter for Blood Sapphire's Revenge.
Right.
And the first 3 episodes have been written, and he's an award-winning screenwriter. And we're to the end of what's called a pitch deck. So he's ready to pitch this to Netflix.
Wow.
So a lot of my time has been spent working with Nick
Yeah.
because he comes up with an episode and then he puts it in my lap and says, "What would you do differently?"
Yeah.
So it's been a
Okay.
collaborative. So I'm writing, and at first I said, "Well, Nick, I'm not a screenwriter." He said, "No, you are. You just don't know
Right.
it."
So you retain all the rights to this. So everything that he's proposing is your vision and
Oh yeah.
your
Yeah. In
input.
fact, that was, I mean, where I've made it clear Nick has made a few changes, but everything is consistent with the characters in the book. And as
Okay.
should we get picked up
Yeah.
by a
Another.
Netflix,
Yeah.
it'll always be, I retain the rights.
Cool. Well, that's exciting. It's going to continue to let you write the story and develop the story even further than you have, with the publication of the novel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
cool. So, okay, Blood Sapphire's Fury, obviously, it's not your main focus right now. If you get picked up by Netflix,
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to write the episodes. Do you think that's going to affect your writing or rewriting of Fury?
Well, when I first contacted Nick Potter,
Yeah,
he read the book
yeah,
and he got on the phone and said, "I love this book. And this is not going to be a movie. This is going to be a TV series. And there's enough material in the book for 5 years, 5 seasons easily.
wow.
You've got so much material in the book that this could go on for a long, long time." So I stood back and went, "Wow,
Wow.
okay."
Yeah,
And he's worked for Disney and he's worked for all of the major players. He knows the industry. He
yeah.
says, "So this is we're gonna this there's a lot here, and you will be working on screenplays as we move ahead." And I keep saying I don't do that. He says, "Yes, you do."
You just don't know it yet.
You don't know it yet.
Wow, that's
So
exciting.
I I expect though that someone will finally then say, "We really want you working on the second book
Right.
because this is going places. We want that second book."
Yeah, yeah, for sure. That'll be difficult to focus on, though,
I
right?
know. Yeah, I know. I
Yeah.
know.
Not to cause any stress or anything, but yeah, you're you'll have you'll have your hands full. So, so Blood Sapphire, is that the first fiction you've ever written? Like, have you written short stories? I know you talked about poetry. Have you written any fiction before Blood Sapphire's Revenge?
No.
Wow, and you're having such success. Your first book.
Yes, I'm amazed.
Wow,
Thankful and
wow.
amazed. I mean, perhaps what readers would like to know is Staff Sergeant Hattie Abrams. Yes, her father was murdered on the day of her birth, but there is. I was always. I've been involved in existentialist philosophy all my life, and my heroes are Soren Kierkegaard and that literature. And so, Hattie Abrams is someone who wrestles with Friedrich Nietzsche, Albert Camus, and meaninglessness. Why am I alive?
Yeah.
Why? What's the meaning of life? And she can't come up with a good reason. After 27 years, she's facing her 27th birthday and saying, "I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to live through the pain. I'm going to kill myself. I'm committing suicide."
Wow.
And so, after this incredible record setting shot in Yemen, where she takes out this bad Al Qaeda guy, 8 days later, she's got her place up in the Benjamin forest, all isolated, and she's going to commit seppuku. And I'll just leave it at that. So the things that are driving her lead to that. And it kind of out of that will come more character driven action. Hattie is someone who's always fighting God. She at a young age, she loved him. Then, after a terrible occurrence as a 14-year-old, she hates him. And then she's going to go to commit suicide, and that won't work out well. And it'll be one thing after another where the reader, I believe, will sense that finally she realizes at the end of the book. She gets it. The person who has always been with her, who has never left her alone, is God. She can't escape him, and yet she goes, I get it now.
Yeah.
You're in the trenches with me. In all of my blood and sweat and swearing and nastiness, and I'm not a nice person. You seem to be with me. And okay, wow. And I think, again, that means something to me because I think when we look inside ourselves, we see, oh my goodness, if you really knew me, you really don't want to know me.
And I bet a lot of
And
us feel that way, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
There you go. And that's just book one.
yeah, yes.
Awesome. Okay. When I was looking at the publication, I noticed that there's a couple of different publication dates. So when was the official publication of Blood Sapphire's Revenge? Because there was a Kindle edition that shows 2021.
Yes. The initial publication was handled by an individual, well meaning, but really didn't understand the industry.
Okay.
And then it went into the hands of another more experienced group. It's all self-publishing. The second group was good, but
Yeah.
finally I gave up in frustration and I found my present book guy, Stress Free Marketing. And he really understands the industry. He's worked
Right.
inside it. And he said, okay, yes, it was published by Kindle here, but we're going to republish it in a new format here. And we're going to do this, that, and the other thing. The first two folks weren't doing you well because they wanted worldwide distribution. Well, I'm telling the listener, beware. Worldwide distribution sounds great, but you earn about a penny every time you sell a copy. And he said, you don't want worldwide distribution. You want a distribution that's within the US and your profit goes up to nearly $4 a book. And I went,
Okay.
you're kidding. He says, no, that's why you've been making pennies.
Wow.
So,
And you're talking
yes,
about Rick Light, right?
Rick Light. So, this kind of, you learn, it's kind of the school of hard knocks. And so, yes, Kindle came out in December 2021, and then it really came out in 2022. But then when Rick Light got it, he put together a second edition, which came out, I don't know, 3 months ago, 4 months ago. And the second edition is that has his handiwork on it. It's got the right
Nice.
distribution. I'm connected with Ingram Spark as well as Kindle Direct, and you got all the bells and whistles. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. Wow. Okay. Well, thanks for sharing that because that's an important thing for a lot of us new writers. It's so difficult to go the traditional route to get picked up,
yes,
right? I mean,
yeah,
it's you may never, and even if you do, how successful will it be? So, I'm glad you shared that, and that's stress free publishing.
yeah. It's stress-free marketing. I chose to go the self-publishing mark when I was at that juncture. I submitted the manuscript to many publishing
Yeah.
houses, but you really do give up control over the book.
Okay.
And
Did
I
you have
didn't want
offers
to.
that you refused?
I had everyone. I was refused by everyone, and I sent out do- dozens and dozens. And yeah, they said no way. And there
Okay.
was there was one group that looked at it and said, "We're this close to saying yes, but we decided no."
Oh, okay.
So I got, that's as far as I got. But ironically, now that I know the business a little bit more, I want to retain control over the manuscript.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look
And
at you now, right? I mean,
yeah,
with fingers crossed, with what's happening in the next weeks and months, that could have been lost,
yes,
right?
yes, yes,
Huh.
yeah.
Nice. Well, okay, that explains the additions. So you would recommend stress-free marketing?
Well, I've been bouncing around over nearly 3 years, and
Yeah,
until I finally got to Rick Light,
sure.
and dealing with him has been just a breath of fresh air. Like suddenly he did within 1 month what should have been done 3 years previously. But
Wow.
I didn't know. You don't
You
know
don't
what
know.
is right and wrong.
But you know, the
And
beauty is in listening to you today,
yeah,
somebody will now know. And
yeah,
actually, I have Rick booked in March of next year to come on the show.
really.
I do, yeah. So I'm quite interested, and hearing that from you is just something else I can
Well,
take to
that's
talk to him,
cool.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. It is.
When I get all wound around the axle like I tend to do, he goes, "Hey, this is stress free, buddy. Let me take care of this." And
Yeah.
I breathe a sigh of relief and I go, "Thank you."
He'll add a few more years to your life.
Yeah, right, right.
Awesome. Medical doctor. So obviously, so much knowledge there. I think you said what did you call yourself? A military brat? Is that what you called yourself?
Yeah, army brat.
Army brat. Yeah, there.
Yeah.
Would you say your medical knowledge and your army knowledge, is that how you came up with the book?
I being raised in a military family
Mm-hmm.
kind of creates its own unseen atmosphere. You kind of grow up where things don't even have to be expressed, but you have a certain. My dad taught me to shoot guns at an early age,
Yeah.
and he was an army marksman type person, and so his discipline over uh, weapons, say what was safe and unsafe, what how you held the pistol, how you everything that goes around. It's like brushing your teeth, how to brush your teeth from. I was raised in that environment, and you become aware that this is a weapon, and it can be a useful tool, but you can be an idiot with it.
Sure.
If you don't know what, and so you learn these rules around that kind of stuff, and a way of how the military thinks about things.
Yeah.
My oldest son did 3 tours in the Middle East, and I was joking with him one time. He was at Camp Casey in Korea, and I said, "Well, John, I mean, he was the executive officer, and he was just gotten his bars. This was
Yeah.
his first assignment, um, and he called me one day and said, 'Dad, I'm in charge of Camp Casey.' Now, this is an enormous army base in the DMZ."
Yeah.
And I said, "What do you mean you're in charge?" He said, "Well, the colonel has gone to Fort Benning to do paratroop or whatever stuff, and I'm in charge. I'm the executive officer." And I said, "You're in charge of?" He said, "Yeah, I am." And I finally, I said, "Well, John," I made this stupid comment. I said, "Well, do you have a gun?" He says, "Dad, the U.S. military can put a bomb anywhere on the surface of the earth within a 1 square meter grid. So yeah, I've got a gun." And but it's a way of thinking about things. You don't normally think in terms of those things. But
Sure.
when I
Yeah.
wrote the book, I spent months and months and months creating the sniper shot that Hattie makes in the first chapter. There's so many things involved when you're shooting beyond a mile. These 2 mile marks where the bullet changes course 3 times, drops, so it is so complicated. But I was remembering what my dad taught me about holding a rifle and breathing out and squeezing the trigger like a baseball and things like that is and then the nuclear aspect. I was raised and that's what he did. He worked on, so all of that comes back in it with a certain flavor. Um yeah.
So yeah, I guess the short answer is yes. Your life has
Yes.
influenced your book. Wow.
Yes.
I've been talking with some authors over the last number of months, and they always talk about difficulty in writing the opposite gender. So you have a very, very, very strong protagonist in Hattie,
Yes.
super strong. Did you find it difficult to write her, to come up with the character and to live it through her eyes?
N- uh, It's interesting. I'm all in on Hattie Abrams,
Yeah, yeah.
and I I like the book has got a number of protagonists and antagonists. There's about 8 or main players in the book,
Right.
and I try to create fully realized characters.
Yeah. And that's just something you developed. Like, is there a technique? Is there anything that you've had to learn to do that, to develop the characters? Again, I don't know what it is, but like some men can't write great female characters. Some females cannot write great male characters. They seem to, go one or the other.
Yeah, I don't
You just never realized that you've never had that problem, obviously.
know. And what I do is when I'm researching a character, I use the MBTI personality profile as an entry to I look at someone and Hattie Abrams fits. I think she's an ISTJ, an IST. She's she's the kind of damsel in this. She's kind of the diva who looks at the audience and says, "What? Me worry? Get off my back!" You know, she
Yeah.
is like she's beautiful, but don't touch me. If you touch me, you're in trouble. And so there are personality profiles for this kind of person. And you can go in
Okay.
through various personality profile testing and get reams of data on what this kind of person, how they act. So for Brianna Ivanova, she has a certain personality type that deals with success and failure in a certain way, deals with men and romantic, and all of these things. You can see parallels in history to these people. And so I pick up a lot. I have a basic idea of how I want Brianna to be, but then
Yeah.
I'll do this other research and go, oh, yeah, that's right. With this personality type, she would not be saying this. She'd be much more, she's more of a theatrical. She can put on the shine.
Okay.
But
So
then,
you spend a ton of time developing your character. So going back
yes,
to Fast Five, when I asked you if it's plot or character driven, that's obvious now that you spend
yeah,
time
I I
developing
I
your
really
characters.
do. It's
Yeah.
months and months of yeah, working on
Okay.
these characters. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Is Hattie based on anybody you know?
No, I
No.
think the
Okay.
only person that I likened her is Queen Esther.
Okay. Fair. What advice would you give me as a new writer or any of our listeners?
Well, I think it was Steinbeck who had the vision for one of his major works. He was just kind of hanging out and he saw this girl in a tree out on a limb. And from that, he wrote this famous novel. I think there has to be a passion to write.
Hmm.
This passion means that it doesn't matter so much where you are or how fancy the studio is or whatever. You simply have to write.
Just right.
Stephen King has written a book called On Writing, which
Yeah.
is brilliant.
Yeah. I've read it.
So it don't look for the if it means sitting down in the basement, that's where you start.
Sure. Yeah. If you have your section chosen, take a minute and share a little bit with us.
Okay, well this is day 23. Day 0 is in a few days. I think it's day 26. And it's Tuesday. It's in La Grana, Greece. It's 3 in the morning, so the scene is set. And Hattie finds herself on board a cigarette racer called the Astria, which turns out to be a drug running boat. The Astria floated quietly in La Grana while Hattie slept with one eye open. At 3 a.m., the engines gurgled and the lights of the port city faded from her window. Hungry, she stole into the galley. The wheelhouse door lay ajar, and she overheard the captain say, "The syndicate won the bid." The seaman replied in tandem, "How much?" $48,000. But when Piaro sees her, I think more, replied Captain Dimas. We'll take her tonight in Marsala. Warn Xuthus. No touching. A cold wave of fear spiraled down Hattie's spine, and she crept back to the stateroom. She practiced breathing and calmed down, but her stomach continued to growl for food. An hour passed, and Hattie opened the door. The engines roared and the waves splashed as the boat sliced through the water. She steadied her movements against the bouncing by keeping her hands on the wall. Cool air met her face. The odors of food and carnauba wax mixed together. Hattie touched her Glock and the knife tucked in her waistband. A single light cast a dim glow over the stove in the narrow, deserted galley. Balancing herself, Hattie planted her feet on the tiled floor as the vessel bounced and swayed. She filled a bowl with stew and tossed in a loaf of bread. Hattie heard a rustling behind her and whipped around. Xuthus had the same idea of an early morning snack, and in the soft light, Hattie's silhouette stood out. The big man downshifted the first gear. His motion slowed as two small eyes fixed themselves on the woman like lasers. He put down his plate, the size of a tea saucer, in his hand, and stepped towards her, mesmerized by this shiny toy. Xuthus reached out, his finger inches from Hattie's face, and speaking in a high pitched, cat like meow, said, Let me pet your hair. Hattie instinctively stepped back and bumped against the stove. Her right hand went to the pistol, while the other pushed the lion's paw aside. Not today, big fella, or ever, she said, and glanced left and right for a way out. Xuthus's eyes hardened and voice darkened. I want to pet it. With surprising quickness, the giant stretched out his arms like albatross wings and boxed her in. He towered over her. The captain won't hear. Don't scream like the others. Hattie's chest seized in panic. Her body became mush as her worst fear materialized like a ghost ship from the fog. Now, the readers don't know there's a whole backstory here as to this was a woman of action, but she has become frozen in her inability to act. And her last parting words from a spec ops guy, the Cyrek McTowell, was he quotes Shakespeare and says, When things get bad, let the lion and tiger out. That's what he says to her. Don't worry, it's there. So Hattie's chest seized in panic. Her body became mush as her worst fear materialized like a ghost ship from the fog. The Glock had no legs. The knife had no hands. Xuthus squealed in delight and put his palm on her head and then grabbed one breast. Like a magician's fire, Hattie's rape flashed up. She was falling under blows from long ago, tied up and spread open for this giant. The claustrophobia clamped down on her throat. Xuthus touched her pelvis. Suddenly, in her chest, Hattie felt the fiery lightsaber come alive and an inner voice say, When you hear the blast of war, summon your rage and strike like a tiger. Like an explosion from a cannon, Hattie's hand shot out. Aiming for the back of Zuzu's throat, her fingers sliced through his skin like the paper bag. They stopped at the spinal cord. On their way out, her fingers snapped shut like a bear trap and ripped out the windpipe, arteries, veins, and all. Blood sprayed like water from a fire hydrant over the ceiling and walls of the galley. Zuthus turned pale. His eyes glazed over, the giant toppled like a redwood and landed on the floor with a loud crash. A dark pool of blood spread out beneath the Leviathan as the skipper rushed in and yelled for his mates. The younger seaman ran in and saw his brother. He fell on the mountain of flesh and let out a blood-curdling scream. The skipper and the barrel-chested seaman stared open-mouthed at the terrible blonde who held an enormous chicken neck in her hand. As her blood boiled, Hattie snarled, Fresh meat for your fucking fish stew.
How can you not love Hattie?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Uh, she's gone through hell and high water. Yeah. And there's more to come.
Yeah, that's the start. Good choice on the excerpt. invites us into the world for sure.
Yeah, I think people read it. They want to turn the page. One of the things when I write, I always ask the question. You have to give the reader a reason to turn the page. And so at the end of a page, I ask myself, well, would you turn the page?
Yeah,
Or have you lost yourself in some random something and
yeah.
you're going to sleep?
Right. As a writer, you don't know. You're enthralled in what you're writing. But it might be as boring as a bedtime story. Yeah,
Well, at one point in the scene where Hattie and Wolf meet, I spent again months on that scene.
yeah,
And at one point was trying to write erotica or eroica, and
yeah.
to make this, I was pushing my boundaries as a writer, going, okay, how far can I take this and keep it real? I want the reader to understand how electric charged this moment is. So I had all of this stuff written and I gave it to my editor, and she just removed it. She said, I don't doubt that you can write Roika, but you have to ask the question, has it advanced your book one
Yeah,
iota?
yeah.
Have you gotten closer to your goal? No. This is an exploration in themes that maybe you find interesting, but for the reader, it doesn't, none of this is important. Get back on the road in your little trolley and go down the road. And I went, oh, that's a bummer.
So it's part of your 30,000 words that she decided to
Yeah.
remove.
Oh,
Gone.
gone.
Well, one of the questions I have here, just kind of at the end of the interview, was what's next for you? Obviously, Fury
Yes, Blood Sapphire's Fury.
and the Netflix pitch. What else you got going on?
Well, that's enough right now.
You think?
I think the biggest question I face right now in Blood Sapphire's Fury is I have to have a reason to write. I could simply write, but for me, there must be a compelling reason. And it was Rick Light that cautioned me. He said, if Blood Sapphire's Fury picks up from Blood Sapphire's Revenge, sometimes that works against you. And it's better to start fresh. Something
Oh,
in the same protagonist, but, and probably my most favorite trilogy is the Millennium series with Steg Larsson and Elizabeth Salander. She's my most favorite of protagonists, and Hattie is based in part on Elizabeth Salander.
okay.
And to know Lisbeth is to know someone who is, those books are so out of the box at every turn, so unpredictable. And she's so gifted and yet so in a box, you know. She's an amazing person. Well, I think that when you start after reading The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and you go to the second one, she's going to kick over a hornet's nest or whatever. It really starts from a whole different perspective on Lisbeth. She's now stolen millions of dollars from the Fenestrom guy, and no one knows it because she's an Uber hacker. And it starts with her down in Gibraltar, just kind of enjoying this life. And you kind of go, well, when are we going to get into action? But he just builds it, builds it, builds it until, wow, you are now into the second book going, what is going to happen now? So when Rick said that, I realized I need to step back, take a deep breath, and ask, do I really want the second book starting at the
Right
end of
there.
the first?
Yeah, okay.
And then I think of Leo Tolstoy, who said, books come in only two flavors. He says, either a stranger comes to town or you leave the town on an adventure,
Okay.
one or the other.
One or the other. Interesting.
So I'm asking myself, if do I want Hattie as a stranger coming to town, or do I want her leaving on an adventure? And it'll still be Blood Sapphire's Fury, but
Sure.
I'm really working on some different thoughts about how to start the book and build something that's really kind of takes the reader a bit by surprise. Because
Okay.
Blood Sapphire's Revenge is super fast paced. I
Yeah.
mean, breakneck speed. The second one, maybe I should take the pedal off the metal a
Slow it
little
down
bit
a little bit.
and have us in a kind of a different thing and then get the speed going again. So I'm kind of wrestling with those things.
Yeah. And again, as I said to you a little earlier, with the chance of Blood Sapphire's Revenge going into a TV series,
Yeah.
starting right at the end, maybe it affects your story how they end the series. Whereas if you leave it a little more open, there's a lot more can be filled in there.
Well, with screenwriting, I mean, Nick takes the first 3 episodes are really based on the first 15 to 16 chapters of the book, but
Okay.
he mixes things up so much. So he starts episode 1 with Brianna Ivanova getting brutalized by Ivan Jurek, the enforcer of the syndicate, and watching her daughter be kidnapped. So that's where he starts the action. Well, that's for me, that's really chapter 6. Yeah. So, I mean, what he's saying to me is as we move ahead, you've got to take a different, you are going to write, but it's, you have to put yourself, you're trying to create something action for an audience, not a readership, but an audience. You're setting a stage and, it's just a different way of thinking about things.
Wow. Okay.
So I got to wrap my head around that.
Yeah, you don't need anything else on your plate.
Yeah, yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah, I think you're good. Hey, Bruce, thanks so much for sharing all that information. Blood Sapphire's Revenge is a very interesting story. Where can people find everything about you? Where would you direct people?
I do have a website. It's the www.drbrucefarmer.com.
Dr. DR, right?
Yeah,
DR.
drbrucefarmer.com, and has our awards and all of that. With a link to Amazon. And of course, you can just go to Amazon and we have
Sure,
it.
sure.
I
Okay.
did the Audible, so you're listening to me do the Audible. I knew I wanted to do an Audible,
Yeah.
but it was with my daughter's encouragement.
Okay.
And then my first publisher knew one of the top sound guys in Portland, and it was still COVID. So we were able to rent this studio in Digital One, which is the premier recording studio in Portland.
Yeah.
And we would show up, no one's there, just
Right.
him and me. And I would do something, and at the end of the day, I'd walk out and I said, so he ended up saying, I let my wife listen, and he's done recordings for lots of big books. And he said, no, you're right in the Amazon pocket, is what he said.
Oh,
You're right in
okay.
the, and I went, okay, well then, good,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was really, again, it was my daughter that kind of said, you should do this. So
Okay. All right. When did you release the audiobook?
that was probably in 2021, I think. Yeah.
I'm an audiobook listener because I drive a lot and I'm always, always, always listening to
Yeah.
books. I physically don't read. So
It is available through the Amazon site.
there are a lot of us who are audiobook listeners for sure. Good for
Yeah.
you. I will definitely take a listen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I'm going to stay in touch. I want to know what happens with this, with your
Absolutely.
pitch. And I'm also interested to see how you pick up Blood Sapphire's Fury. I'm really interested to see. As a writer, I'm
Yeah.
intrigued at how you're going to be able to. You got so much going on with your first one now, with the Netflix pitch. How you're going to get into it. So
Yeah.
I'll definitely
Yeah.
stay in
I'm
touch.
curious myself.
Yeah. You learn and then you let me know.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
Awesome. Well, listen, thanks so much. We'll sign off here, and we'll stay in touch, and maybe we'll do another episode down the road.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me on your show. Just so honored. Really
My
honored.
pleasure.
Thank you.
My pleasure, sir. Thank you.